Hello, everybody. My name is Srravya, and this is what we're going to be looking at. Is she a part of your community? The she specifically is in italics, because when I say she, I don't only mean the female gender, but broadly the genders that are underrepresented in our community. So, zooming in on the gender diversity in OSM, so I'm not sure how many of you noticed, but in the call for applications for talks and scholarships, there was a particular checkbox which said, I'm a woman. So that got me wondering about the gender composition of our community, and that has resulted in this talk. So my name is Srravya, quite a weird spelling. I come from India, and where I volunteer with a free software movement, which was also my introduction to OSM. I mostly edit data in India, and when it's global, it's mostly translations to Indian languages. And I'm also part of the weekly OSM English team. So when I first wanted to understand the gender composition in OSM, I tried to find an existing tool or a methodology to do this. But it's quite unfortunate that I could actually not find anything which could give me very statistical data on how the gender composition stands in our community. So I have picked mailing list as one of the means of understanding the gender diversity in our community. And this is because it's the space for both newcomers and experienced mappers. I mean, experienced mappers pretty much live on our mailing lists. And for newcomers, it's a very easy first step to come and say, hey, hi, I want to work in OSM. This is what I want to do. How do I get started? That sort of a thing. And not just discussions, we've seen a lot of event reminders, announcements, doubts, discussions that sometimes turn into debates, all sorts of things. And more importantly, with the mailing lists, and in the mailing list is unique because all the other forums, for instance, forum.openstreetmap or help or the blog posts, we cannot really get a closer look at how specific communities work. But in the case of mailing lists, we can take a look at how OSM works at large, how the gender composition is in OSM at large, and also particularly in specific communities. If I wanted to understand specifically for US, I can go to the US mailing list. Similarly with Europe, Asia, and things like that. So I've picked mailing list as a means to analyze gender diversity, and this is what I've done. So from the, like Manfred mentioned, the 160 odd mailing lists, I've picked up a few of them, mostly geographically diverse. And for the last 1 year, from September 2016 to September 2015 to August 2016, I've gone through the archives and studied the archives of all these lists to understand the women participation in our lists. So what I've done is a binary classification based on username and tried to arrive at numbers to say that this is the percentage of female participation in our community on a monthly basis, and finally got an annual average for the last year. So this is how the numbers look. I'm pretty sure in some cases you will have to squint your way to look at the numbers. I've specifically put it this way because just as faint as the numbers are, that's how the communication and involvement is also. This is only a representation of how things are. So if you look at it, the US and some of the Europe lists, Australia, it's all in single digits. And it's interesting to note that in the case of Latin America, nearly 1/3 of the community involvement on the mailing list comes from women, which is quite interesting to observe. And apart from the communities themselves, if you take a look at the tagging mailing list, so the tagging mailing list is one of the most high volume lists where on a monthly basis we see close to 400, 500 messages, but only 2%, I think that's the least visible number, only 2% of them come from women. And so for those of you who are not aware, there is a diversity talk mailing list, which was quite active for a year or so, but since 2015, there's not been any activity. And Talk Iron, I'm from India, and in Talk Iron, we see a 14.7, and most of it, the credit goes to, the credits for the number, which indicate female participation, goes to Jinal, who's sitting here. So every month, there's like, yeah, she deserves a huge round of applause. So it felt good to finally see some consistent involvement from women. So in the case of India, if I probably remove Jinal's messages, it'll drop to like 4 or 3% again. So some of the observations from this study is, one was blatantly obvious. There's barely any women participating in our discussions. And one more important thing was, in the case of LATAM, in the case of India, we saw that the numbers somehow successfully touched a double digit. But what we need to understand is that these are very low volume lists. So let's say there are, on an average, only 50 messages sent on that list per month. So even 5 will account for a significant proportion. But in the case of tagging mailing list, where we see around like 500 mails, 5 is a very small number. So what I'm trying to say is that the number of, the actual involvement of women across these lists is the same. Because the overall number like varies, we saw like a bigger number. Case in point is actually LATAM. So because I noticed a 30% participation, I reached out to Laura, I reached out to Celine, Miriam, to try and understand how they do this. I told Miriam, okay, wow, you guys are doing a great job. So how do you do this? Like, there's significant female participation. And the response I got was, what? What's wrong with you? We're trying to improve our numbers. Like, it's so bad. No girls ever turn up. So, and finally, this could also be a very interesting observation. So most of the participation that we see, or anything that comes from women, for most part, has been, hey, I want to get started. How do I get started? Or so-and-so event is happening at this point in time. Just show up if you're interested. Mostly announcements and introductions. No serious involvement in discussions. So the bias in methodology, this method, I've got to admit, has its gaps, and I've called out most of them here. So because the study is based on usernames, in the case of pseudonyms and gender-neutral names, I did a couple of things. I ran a search across their various OSM profiles on Help, on Forum, on OSM itself, to find out their gender identity. And also on the online, broadly, like on GitHub and Twitter. So, and non-obvious gender identity is, so while a name can only indicate at this moment, if I took the name John, I'd probably think that it's a male, but it's quite likely that the name could also identify, the person could identify as by another gender identity. But because the study is based on only usernames, it does a very binary classification, and this is a future scope for the study. And the last bias that could possibly be there is women contributors who are probably actively contributing, but not talking on the mailing list. Now, this is interesting because it makes an assumption that women are contributing, but just not talking. So one, we're assuming the unknown, and two, even if this is the truth, we have no idea if it's the truth, and even if it's the truth, if they're not communicating, we still have a serious problem to fix. But why? OSM is, at the end of the day, just a map which is about places, about roads, rivers. Why does gender diversity matter? So I did a quick study with numbers. I looked at the tag, the amenity shop equals car, and globally I found that it's been mapped close to 70,000 times. And car is something that's gender neutral, like a girl could ride it, or a guy could ride it. And something like cosmetics, which is mostly considered female, is only mapped a few thousand times. So while this might not seem like a serious problem, we've got more. So this is the map of India. And on overpass, I tried to look for the amenity equal to toilets. And coming from India, I'd like to add that this is a very important amenity. Public toilets are an essential thing in India because not every household has one. So this is how it looks when I queried for toilets. And when I added female equal to yes, this is how the numbers just dropped drastically. I wanted to find out if this is the same across countries, so I quickly did it in the different part of the world, and the results were pretty much the same. I did it again for public showers, and the trend continues. So it's not that the gender gap in our community is so wide that it has the potential to affect the kind of map that we're building. And beyond the map, it also affects the community. And I'd like to share an example from my own place. So do you find anything strange about this design? So this was a t-shirt that was designed for a workshop back at home. And So this t-shirt was designed for participants of a workshop. It was designed by a male. And when it was up for review, most of the people commented on, hey, let's change the color, let's change the font of the freedom, and things like that. But it took a girl, a person who identifies as female, to come and say, you've got the C and the circles in all the wrong places. Like, just remove them or move it to the back. Girls are not going to be comfortable wearing those. So this is to highlight that we need gender participation from all gender, not just to fill in the data or the gaps we find in our maps, but also for us to be a better community. I mean, none of us want to chase girls away from our community meetings, do we? So, agreed that this is a huge problem. So what do we do about it? First step, we go out, we reach out to women, try to bring them in, introduce them to the community, hold exclusive talks, workshops, mapping parties, do whatever it takes. And one thing that I'd like to point out is get them started in their area of interest, and do not assume that their area of interest is shops equal to cosmetics or marking toilets as female. They could be interested in pretty much anything, so try to identify their area of interest and help them get started there. And in some cases, introduction is a great step, but for some of them, they might need more than that. So just kind of have a look on them, see if they need any help, and try to get them involved in the community. While you get them started, you might be a great mentor to them, but also make sure that it doesn't end there and they get involved in the community as well. And definitely involve them in decision making. We do not want weird t-shirts out at any of our events. And finally, providing an inclusive environment. It could be very little things that we do, starting from what kind of venue we hold our event at what time we hold them, do we have options for babysitting, can they bring kids along? We could just call all these out in our event announcements. I understand that providing all these is not a real possibility all the time, but at least acknowledging that we are aware of these sends out a strong message of inclusion that I think should be an integral part of all our communities. So, we do all this, there are more women in the community. Does that make OSM gender diverse? Not exactly. It's a great first step, but gender diversity means a lot more than just more women, more female participation. So right now, the amenity called toilets has only a binary classification where we can tag it as either unisex or male or female, and there's no recognition for other gender in such an amenity. But I think we have a thing or two to learn from this proposal, where I noticed that it's got a trans man and trans woman in addition to male and female. So I think all of us coming from various parts of the world and being a part of a lot of community work need to understand that there is serious need for gender diversity in our communities and work towards, or rather map towards, an inclusive OSM. And thank you. if anybody's got ideas, suggestions, I'd love to chat. I'll be here for today and for the next 2 days. Yeah.
Okay. Questions? Thank you for the presentation. Very, very passionate and inspiring presentation. Any questions? Yeah.
You first.
This is great.
Thank you.
I really like your approach overall. I want to geek out with you later. Two things to pay attention to if you would like. Out of the Center for Civic Media at the MIT Media Lab, they've been doing a lot of work around gender and data that might help speed up your process. So there's the Open Gender Tracker, which is a way of running usually names, like proper names, as opposed to usernames, to automatically classify and then tag for specific instances or exceptions. And the other is they do a lot of work around queer data, like what is it to not have a gender binary but to have other options as well, and they would be great to talk to and they would be enthusiastic about that.
Definitely. Thank you.
And you're going to introduce her?
Totally.
Thanks so much for your talk and for your research. And so you heard, I think you were at my session yesterday where
Yes.
I did some data research too. So what I'm really excited about is that we're both thinking about metrics, and I think we're not alone in
course in the past and will be in the future. And it's an important course, but I think it's also a course where you have to sort of, it's easy to kind of, well, be a little bit to do too much marketing. And when you showed your initial thing about the toilets, your map where you counted the toilets in India, I immediately thought, well, something's wrong about this. And I went through OSM and counted the nodes, and yes, you're right, there are about 800 toilets in India, and only 35 of them are marked as female, but only 38 of them are marked as male. So there's not really, that your picture, if you see the picture, it immediately looks like, oh my God, women are so disproportionate in OSM, and data for women is lacking. But it's really, well, there are the majority of toilets in India have no marker, no male or female, and just a tiny fraction of them are marked as either male toilets or female toilets. So I think you were a little bit misrepresenting things there, because your map looks like, oh my God, OSM is not catering to females at all, when in fact the message should have been, well, OSM is not going into as much detail as it should, not marking toilets with the gender properly, but it's not like there's only a fraction of female toilets compared to male toilets. So that's just a minor thing, and it's easy to get to, and this is, things like that get retweeted and retold, and then we have press that says, oh my God, women are so underrepresented, and it's important to get the facts right. And I don't want people to say that only like female toilets are a factor 10 to 1 compared to male toilets in India, because that wouldn't be correct.
Oh,
Thank you.
very true. I agree, but I'd also like to add that at least in the case of India, I think either female toilets are not being marked, or not enough care is being taken to additionally tag them as usable for female. And coming from India, I can vouch that every other toilet is probably for guys, and unless a girl knows that she can actually use it, it's always never a given. I understand that overall the data has to be tagged well and better than what we have right now. I was just calling out specifically in this case to sort of reiterate the need for what we have to work towards. Anything you'd like to add? Oh, yeah.
Thank you. Over
Hi.
here. Thank you so much for doing that study, and I really like your examples very much. I think that the lack of putting an explicit name on it is a very important issue. The fact that we can't easily get the statistics. I think we need to enlist the support of some very brilliant people, who there are many of in this room, to make sure that we can improve the tracking. I think this is true of many organizations. I worked for a professional society where we didn't even track that 10 years ago, and no ethnicity data, no racial data, none of that. So it's something that I think as an organization grows, we definitely need to pay attention to.
a lot.
My analysis looks at these tags and data from a gender perspective. I've not looked at it from a regional perspective to understand if it's to understand the Western influence. Maybe if I look, if we do a study on it probably together, we should be able to find something. That's it. Thank you.
Any more questions? Yeah.
Thanks very much for the presentation. Just a brief comment. A lot of us in this room work for employers where we're either paid to work on OSM or it relates to our job. So I think we all have a role to play in terms of actual hiring practices and influencing the direction of hiring practices in our workplaces. And I think that's one of many methods through which we can contribute to addressing this. So thank you.
Okay.
Okay, if there are no more questions,